Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. Story 1. I'm Hannah, 34. The moon above Fish Lake National Forest dripped like wax. That's what I told the investigators later, though they didn't write it down. They wrote psychological break and exposure and trauma-induced hallucination, but they didn't write what I saw. They didn't write about the moon bleeding light onto the aspen groves, or how the wax pooled in silver puddles that moved against the wind. They especially didn't write about Marcus. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'd driven into Fish Lake National Forest in central Utah on a Friday afternoon in early October. Marcus and I in our 12-year-old Winnebago that leaked when it rained and smelled permanently of propane and old coffee. The Pando Grove, that massive colony of quaking aspens connected by a single root system, the largest living organism on Earth, had been on my bucket list since college. Marcus had been less enthusiastic. "It's just trees, Han," he'd said as we crossed into Utah, his hands loose on the wheel, eyes hidden behind cheap gas station sunglasses. "Really big trees, sure, but trees. It's not just trees, it's one tree, technically, all 4,300 of them connected underground. It's been alive for thousands of years. Still looks like a forest to me." That was Marcus. Practical to the point of being deliberately obtuse, which had been charming when we first met at a software conference 6 years ago, his blunt assessments cutting through corporate doublespeak, but had curdled into something else during our marriage. Something dismissive. Something that made me feel small. The designated camping area along Forest Road 132 was nearly empty when we arrived. Just one other RV visible through the golden shimmer of autumn aspens. The ranger at the station had been an older woman with sun-damaged skin and pale eyes that seemed to look through me. "Just you two?" she'd asked. "Just us," Marcus confirmed. She'd held his credit card for a moment too long, her thumb rubbing across the embossed numbers. "Forecast says clear. Should be beautiful. Moon's full tonight." "Perfect," I'd said, trying for enthusiasm. Her eyes had finally focused on me. "You ever been here before?" "First time." She'd handed back the card. "Stay on the marked trails, and if you see anything strange with the moon, get inside and lock your doors." Marcus had laughed. "What, werewolves?" She hadn't laughed back. "Just a local thing. Old superstition. Probably nothing." We'd set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by aspens, their white bark marked with dark knots that looked like watching eyes. Marcus had insisted on the spot despite my suggestion we park closer to the other RV. A sleek Airstream that looked expensive and new. "We came here to get away from people," he'd said, positioning the Winnebago with its door facing the forest. "Not to make friends." The sun set early, dropping behind the western ridge and plunging the grove into premature twilight. I'd made pasta on the propane stove while Marcus drank beer and scrolled through his phone trying to get a signal. "Nothing," he'd muttered. "Fucking dead zone." "That's kind of the point." "Easy for you to say. You don't have Richter breathing down your neck about the quarterly reports." I'd bitten back my response. That he'd promised to leave work behind. That this trip was supposed to be about us, about fixing whatever had broken between us over the past year of 12-hour workdays and silent dinners and separate bedrooms. Instead, I'd served the pasta and eaten in silence while the aspens whispered around us. The moon had risen around 8, and that's when I first noticed something wrong. It came up huge and orange, a harvest moon, but as it climbed above the trees, its light had a strange quality. Thick, almost liquid. The beams that filtered through the aspen branches didn't just illuminate, they seemed to pool on the ground in viscous puddles that caught the light and held it, trembling like mercury. "Marcus, look at this." He'd glanced up from his phone. "What?" "The moonlight. It's weird." "It's moonlight, Han. It's always weird." But he'd looked uncomfortable, I'd noticed. His jaw had tightened, and he'd shifted in his camp chair so he wasn't facing the moon directly. The temperature had dropped fast after sunset, and by 9 we'd retreated into the RV. I tried to read by the overhead light, but the book couldn't hold my attention. Outside, the aspens rattled in a wind I couldn't hear, their leaves flickering like 10,000 nervous hands. "I'm going to bed," Marcus had announced, disappearing into the back bedroom without kissing me goodnight. I'd stayed up another hour, watching through the window as moonlight continued to pool between the trees. At one point, I could have sworn I saw something moving through those puddles, a shadow passing beneath the surface of the light like a fish beneath ice. But when I pressed my face to the glass to see better, there was nothing. Just before midnight, I'd finally climbed into the converted dinette bed we'd made up for me. Marcus and I hadn't shared a bed in 4 months. The counselor we'd seen twice had said it was a temporary arrangement, while we worked through our intimacy issues. But we'd stopped going to counseling, and the arrangement had become permanent. I'd almost fallen asleep when the tapping started. Soft at first, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap against the side of the RV, like someone gently knocking with a single knuckle. I'd lain still, listening. The tapping moved, circling the RV slowly. Tap, tap, tap along the passenger side. Tap, tap, tap across the back, right below where Marcus was sleeping. Tap, tap, tap up the driver's side. It stopped at my window. I'd held my breath, staring at the thin curtain between me and whatever was outside. In the silence, I could hear my heart hammering, could feel the pulse in my throat. Then, tap, 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 right next to my head. "Marcus," I'd whispered. Then louder, "Marcus!" No response from the back bedroom. The tapping continued, patient and methodical. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, tap, tap. I'd grabbed my phone, no signal, of course, and used its flashlight to creep to the window. My hands shook as I reached for the curtain. Just an animal, I'd told myself. A branch in the wind. Tap, tap, tap. Anything normal. I'd pulled the curtain back an inch. Moonlight flooded in, that strange, thick light, and in it I could see the aspen trees, their white bark gleaming. Nothing else. No animal, no branch. The tapping had stopped the moment I'd looked, but the moonlight on the ground was moving, pulsing, and as I watched, a puddle of light directly below my window began to bulge upward, forming a shape. An arm, a hand, fingers. They pressed against the outside of the RV, and that's when the tapping resumed. From inside the wall, I'd stumbled backward, dropping the curtain, my breath coming in short gasps. The tapping continued for another minute, then stopped. I'd waited in the dark for over an hour before exhaustion finally pulled me under. I'd dreamed of drowning in light. Morning came cold and bright, the aspens brilliant gold against a cloudless sky. I'd woken to find Marcus already up, standing outside in his fleece jacket and drinking coffee from his travel mug. "Sleep okay?" he'd asked when I emerged, squinting against the sun. "Not really. Didn't you hear that tapping last night?" "What tapping?" Something, was knocking on the RV. It went all around. He'd given me that look, the one that made me feel like I was being irrational. "I didn't hear anything." "You probably dreamed it." "I wasn't dreaming. It woke me up." "Hon, there's nothing out here but trees and maybe some deer. You're working yourself up over nothing." I'd wanted to argue, to insist, but the sunlight made everything seem absurd. The moonlight puddles were gone, the aspens were just trees, and I was a grown woman scared of noises in the night. We'd spent the morning hiking the Lakeshore Trail, a 6-mile loop that wound through the Pando Grove. Marcus had been in better spirits, pointing out interesting rock formations and attempting terrible bird calls. For a few hours it had almost felt like old times, like the early days when we'd backpacked through the Smokies and laughed at each other's terrible camping food. But as we walked, I'd started noticing things. The aspens, for one. They all had those dark knots in their bark, scattered at irregular intervals up and down their trunks. But in some trees, the knots were arranged in patterns. 2 near the top, like eyes. 1 lower down, like a mouth. In the bright afternoon sun, it was easy to dismiss as pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns. Except they weren't random. Every tree we passed had a face, and every face was watching us. "Marcus, look at these trees." "I'm looking. They're aspens. We've been looking at aspens all day." "No, I mean really look. The knots. They're arranged like what? Faces? He'd laughed. Come on, Han. You're starting to weird me out. But I could tell he saw it too because he'd started walking faster, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, deliberately not looking at the trees around us. We'd returned to camp in the late afternoon to find our campsite disturbed. Nothing major, just small things. The camp chairs had been moved, positioned in a circle instead of facing each other. Our water jug was on the ground, its cap unscrewed and lying several feet away. And on the picnic table, written in what looked like ash or dirt, was a single word: stay. What the hell? Marcus had approached the table slowly, his earlier confidence evaporating. Did someone come into our camp? Must have, while we were hiking. But why? They didn't take anything. I'd looked around. The airstream we'd seen yesterday was gone, its spot empty except for tire tracks in the soft earth. We were alone in the campground now. Maybe it was them. A joke or something. But Marcus had been shaking his head, running his fingers through his hair in that anxious gesture I knew so well. No. We should go. Let's pack up and go. Go where? It's almost 5. By the time we pack everything and drive out, it'll be dark. So, we'll drive to a hotel, somewhere with Wi-Fi and locks and other people. I'd been surprised by the fear in his voice. Marcus didn't scare easily. It's just someone messing with us, probably drunk campers. Then where are they? Good question. The campground was empty. No other vehicles, no sounds of people. Just us and the aspens and the word stay on our picnic table. We'd compromised. We'd stay the night but keep the RV locked and leave first thing in the morning. Marcus had wiped away the message. It had been ash, definitely ash, which was strange since we hadn't had a fire, and we'd spent the remaining daylight hours inside the RV, reading and pretending everything was normal. The sun set at 6:47. I know because I watched the clock, watched the light fade, watched the shadows between the aspens grow long and deep. The moon rose at 7:13, and it was wrong. It came up in the same spot as the night before, huge and orange, but as it climbed, its light didn't turn silver. It stayed orange, then deepened to red, then to something darker, a color that shouldn't exist, that hurt to look at. And as it rose, it began to melt. That's the only word I have for it. The moon melted. Its light ran down the sky in rivulets dripping onto the aspen grove below, and where the light touched the trees, the bark began to bubble and run like wax. "Marcus!" My voice came out strangled. "Marcus, look at the moon." He was in the kitchen area, heating up canned soup. "I'm not falling for that again. I'm serious. Look." He'd sighed and turned to the window. I watched his face as he saw it, watched his expression shift from annoyance to confusion to dawning horror. That can't be." The moon continued to melt, its light pooling on the ground in those same thick puddles I'd seen the night before. But now I could see what was inside them. Shapes moving beneath the surface. Figures. They rose from the puddles like swimmers surfacing. But wrong. All wrong. Too thin, too tall, their limbs bent at angles that made my eyes hurt. They were made of moonlight, translucent and shifting, but solid enough to disturb the fallen aspen leaves as they moved. There were dozens of them surrounding our RV in a loose circle, and they were all facing us. "Lock the doors," Marcus whispered. "Lock everything." I'd already moved, throwing the deadbolt on the main door, checking the windows. The RV had good locks. We'd upgraded them after reading horror stories about break-ins at campgrounds, but looking at those things outside, I doubted any lock would help. The figures stood perfectly still, moonlight dripping from their bodies like water. I couldn't make out faces, just the suggestion of features, dark hollows where eyes should be. Marcus had turned off all the lights inside, and we'd huddled together in the dark, watching through gaps in the curtains. "What are they?" I'd whispered. I don't know. Jesus Christ, I don't know." One of the figures moved closer, gliding across the ground without walking, its feet, if they were feet, never touching the earth. It approached Marcus's window, the one in the back bedroom, and pressed against the glass. The window began to frost, ice crystals spreading in geometric patterns. "They can't get in," Marcus said, more to himself than to me. "They're just light. They can't get in." But the tapping started again. Tap, tap, tap. All around the RV, coming from every side, every window, a dozen hands knocking politely, patiently, tap, tap, tap. Then the voices began. They spoke in unison, a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. At first I couldn't make out words, just a susurrus like wind through leaves. But gradually the whispers resolved into language. "Stay," they said. "Stay. Stay. Stay." "We need to go," Marcus said, already moving toward the driver's seat. "Start the engine. Drive. The trees. I don't care about the trees. Drive." I'd scrambled into the passenger seat as Marcus turned the key. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. The headlights blazed to life, illuminating the clearing ahead. The figures didn't move. They stood in our path, perhaps 20 of them, shoulder to shoulder, watching. Marcus threw the RV into gear and gunned the engine. We hit the first figure at maybe 15 miles per hour. I'd braced for impact, but there was nothing. No thud, no resistance. The figure simply dissolved into light that splashed across the windshield like water. For a moment we couldn't see, the glass covered in that thick, luminous substance. Then it began to drip upward, defying gravity, streaming back up into the melting moon above. Marcus kept driving, plowing through figure after figure. Each one burst into light, each one's essence flowed upward. The windshield was clear enough to see by the time we reached the main road. Behind us, the clearing filled with moonlight, the puddles growing larger, merging into a lake of liquid luminescence. We drove in silence for 10 minutes, following the winding forest road toward the highway. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? We'd both seen it. Both knew we couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it away. The road should have taken us to Highway 89 within 20 minutes. After 45 minutes of driving, we were still in the forest. The aspens pressed close on both sides, their faces, I could see them clearly now, no longer able to deny what they were, watching our passage with those knothole eyes. "This isn't right," Marcus muttered. "We should have hit the highway by now. Maybe you took a wrong turn." "I didn't take any turns. This is the only road." But 5 minutes later, we passed our campsite again. I recognized the clearing immediately, recognized the picnic table with its ghost of an ash message. We were back where we started. "No," Marcus said. "No, no, 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 no." He spun the wheel, turning the RV around and drove the other direction. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. The moon followed us, melting constantly, never diminishing, an infinite source of that strange light. 20 minutes later, we passed our campsite again, from the other direction this time, but unmistakably the same spot. Marcus slammed on the brakes and we sat in the middle of the road, engine idling, staring at the place we couldn't leave. "The ranger," I said suddenly. "She warned us, remember? She said if we saw anything strange with the moon, we should lock ourselves inside. We are inside. No, she said get inside. Like, maybe the RV doesn't count. That's insane. We're driving in circles past our own campsite while the moon melts. Everything is insane." Marcus had gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "So what? We go back to the clearing? Park? Wait for those things to come back? Maybe they'll leave us alone if we stay inside. That's what they kept saying, right? Stay." It was a thin hope, but it was all we had. Marcus drove us back to the clearing. We didn't have to go far. The road seemed to be contracting, each circuit shorter than the last, and parked in our original spot. The figures were waiting. More of them now, maybe 50, standing in concentric circles around where we'd parked. The moon hung directly overhead, its surface roiling, constantly melting and reforming. We'd killed the engine and sat in darkness, watching. The figures didn't approach. They simply stood, sentinel still, their eyeless faces turned toward us. "What do they want?" Marcus whispered. I'd been wondering the same thing, but as I stared at them, at the way they held themselves, patient and expectant, I began to understand. I think they're guarding us, keeping us here. Why? I don't know. But that was a lie. I did know, or at least I suspected. The ranger's words came back to me. Just a local thing. Old superstition. And before that, you ever been here before? Not us. Me. She'd asked if I had been here before, as if she'd been expecting someone. The hours crawled past. We tried to sleep in shifts, one of us always watching the figures outside. They never moved, never changed position. The moon continued its endless melting, painting the world in shades of impossible light. Around midnight, Marcus finally broke down. "I'm sorry," he'd said, his voice thick, "for everything. For being an asshole, for checking out of our marriage, for dragging you here when I knew you were trying to save us and I just didn't care anymore." I'd taken his hand, surprised by the warmth of his fingers. "We're going to get out of this." "You don't know that." "We will. We have to." But I wasn't sure. The figures were still waiting, and the night showed no signs of ending. At 3 a.m., one of the figures finally moved. It glided forward, approaching the door. We watched, frozen, as it raised one long arm and knocked. Tap, tap, tap. The voice came again, but this time it was singular, not a chorus. And it sounded almost human. "Hannah," it said. "We've been waiting." Marcus looked at me. "How does it know your name?" "I don't know." "Hannah," the figure repeated. "You've been called. You've been chosen. You belong to the grove now. You always have." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't understand." "Your mother understood. When she brought you here, when you were too young to remember. She tried to keep you, tried to hide you from us. But you've returned. You've always been meant to return." I'd felt something crack open inside me, a door to a memory I didn't know I had. My mother, young and desperate, standing in a grove of aspens. My mother, whispering to trees. My mother, running with a child in her arms, with me, while moonlight pooled behind us. My mother, who'd died when I was 3 years old. An accident, my father had said. A tragic accident in Utah while they were camping. "No," I whispered. "Yes," the figure said. "She made a bargain, her life for yours. But bargains with the grove can only be delayed, not broken. Eventually, the debt must be paid." Marcus squeezed my hand. "Don't listen to it. It's lying." But I knew it wasn't. I could feel the truth of it. Feel the grove's roots reaching up through the earth toward me. Feel the moon's melted light soaking into my skin through the thin walls of the RV. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Only what was promised. Only what you are. Join us. Become part of the grove. Live forever in the light and the earth and the endless growing." "And if I refuse?" The figure tilted its head. "Then you will join us anyway, but it will hurt. It will hurt him too." A gesture toward Marcus. "He is not part of the bargain, but he is close to you. The roots do not discriminate." I'd looked at Marcus then, really looked at him. For all our problems, for all the ways we'd failed each other, he was here. He'd driven me into the forest I'd wanted to see. He'd held my hand in the dark. "I'll go," I said, "but you let him leave. You let him drive out of here and you never touch him again." "Hannah, no." "Marcus, please, I have to." "You don't have to do anything. We'll find another way." But there was no other way. I could feel it in my bones, in the marrow the grove was already claiming. The figures were closing in, the circle tightening, and the moon was melting faster now, its light raining down on us in sheets. "Do we have a bargain?" the figure asked. "Yes." The word left my mouth, and instantly the night changed. The figures parted, forming a path from the RV door to the edge of the clearing. The moon stopped melting, holding its shape in the sky. And inside me, something shifted, something old and vast and patient. I'd kissed Marcus once, hard, tasting salt from his tears or mine. Then I'd opened the door and stepped out into the moonlight. The light was warm, almost hot. It clung to me like syrup, coating my skin, seeping into my pores. With each step toward the tree line, I felt myself changing, my bones lengthening, my sight sharpening until I could see every leaf, every blade of grass, every drop of melted moon. Behind me, Marcus had tried to follow, but the figures held him back, not touching, just standing between us, an impassable wall of light. "Hannah!" His voice broke. "Hannah, please!" But I couldn't stop. The grove was calling and I was answering. The aspens opened before me, their faces welcoming, and I stepped into their embrace. The last thing I remember from that night was the feeling of roots wrapping around my ankles, gentle and inexorable, pulling me down into the earth, and the sound of the RV engine starting, Marcus driving away while he still could. That was 3 weeks ago. They found the RV abandoned on Highway 89 2 days later. Marcus was gone. They searched the forest, brought in dogs and helicopters, found nothing. Just an empty RV and a campsite with strange scorch marks in a circle around where it had been parked. I know this because I can see them, the searchers. I can see everything that happens in the grove now. I am in every tree, every root, every drop of sap. I am the grove, and the grove is me, and we are ancient and patient and endless. And I can see Marcus, too. He came back. Of course he came back. They always come back when they love someone enough. He's camping at the same spot right now, his new tent pitched in the same clearing, the moon rising huge and orange overhead. He's calling my name, begging the trees to give me back. He doesn't understand that I can't come back. I am the trees. I am the moonlight. I am the thing standing at the edge of his firelight, wearing Hannah's face but empty behind the eyes. The moon is starting to melt again, and Marcus still doesn't know how to leave. I want to warn him. I want to scream at him to run, to never come back, to forget me. But the grove is hungry, and the bargain I made only covered his first escape. This time, when he walked back into the forest, he made his own choice. The roots are reaching for him now, sliding through the soil beneath his feet. The moonlight is pooling around his tent, and I am walking toward him, my moonlight body gliding across the ground, my hand raised to knock against his tent. Tap, tap, tap. "Hannah?" His voice, hopeful and breaking. "Hannah, is that you?" I don't answer. I can't. The grove speaks through me now, and it only knows one word. "Stay," I whisper, and he will. We both will, forever. The moon drips wax across the aspens, and the grove grows larger by 2. Story 2. I'm Brooklyn, 34. The fog at Kisatchie National Forest whispered my fears aloud. I never believed in any of that supernatural bullshit. Ghosts, demons, skinwalkers, all of it was just stories people told around campfires to scare each other, to add some manufactured excitement to their boring lives. I was a nurse practitioner from Houston, dealt in facts and evidence, in things I could see and touch and measure. So, when my girlfriend Rachel suggested we take her new RV out to Kisatchie National Forest in central Louisiana for a long weekend, I didn't hesitate. It was late October, the weather was finally cooling down, and I desperately needed a break from the hospital's relentless grind. Rachel had been talking about this trip for months. She'd saved up and bought a used 2018 Forest River RV, 26 feet of aluminum-sided freedom, she called it. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours for the weekend, and the idea of sleeping under the pines, away from traffic and sirens and the constant ping of hospital alerts, sounded like paradise. We left Houston early on a Friday morning, Rachel behind the wheel, me navigating with my phone propped on the dash. The drive took about 4 hours, winding through increasingly rural Louisiana until we turned off Highway 119 onto a narrow Forest Service road that led into the Kisatchie Hills wilderness. The trees closed in around us. Longleaf pines and sweet gums, their trunks dark with age, their canopy filtering the autumn sunlight into a greenish twilight even at midday. "This is beautiful," Rachel said, her hands relaxed on the wheel. She had this way of finding joy in simple things that I both admired and sometimes envied. At 31, she was 3 years younger than me, worked as a graphic designer from home, and had a calmness about her that balanced out my perpetual anxiety. We'd been together for 2 years, and this trip felt like a milestone. Our first real adventure together, just the two of us and the open road. We'd talked about doing more of this, maybe even selling everything and living full-time in an RV someday. It was a nice dream. The campsite we'd reserved was deep in the forest, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that made the RV's cabinets rattle and groan. Wild azalea trail ran nearby, and the campground itself was primitive. No hookups, no running water, just a cleared space among the trees and a fire ring made of blackened stones. Perfect for what we wanted. Total isolation. Total peace. We were the only ones there. The ranger station was 15 miles back, and we'd seen exactly 2 other vehicles on the drive-in, both locals and pickup trucks who'd barely glanced our way. Cell service was non-existent. We'd brought a satellite phone for emergencies, but Rachel had insisted we leave it turned off unless we really needed it. "Digital detox," she'd said with a grin. The first day passed like something out of a travel magazine. We set up camp, took a hike along the Azalea Trail, made dinner over the fire, steaks and roasted vegetables accompanied by a bottle of red wine Rachel had been saving. The forest was alive with sound. Birds calling, insects humming, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth, rich and clean. That night we made love in the RV's narrow bed. The windows cracked open to let in the cool air, and afterward we lay tangled together, listening to the darkness outside. I felt more relaxed than I had in months, maybe years. My shoulders had finally unclenched. My mind had finally stopped its constant churning through patient charts and treatment plans and all the small ways people could die that I'd spent my career trying to prevent. "I love you," Rachel whispered into my hair. "Love you too," I said, and meant it with my whole chest. I should have known that feeling wouldn't last. The fog came the second night. It rolled in after sunset, thick and low to the ground, moving between the trees like something alive. From inside the RV, I watched it through the window above the dinette, my coffee mug warming my hands. It wasn't the normal kind of fog, the kind that hangs in the air and diffuses light. This was dense, almost solid-looking, and it seemed to flow rather than drift. "That's weird," Rachel said, coming up behind me. She'd just finished washing the dinner dishes in our portable basin. "Probably just temperature differential," I said, falling back on my default setting. Find the rational explanation. Dismiss the unease. Cold air meeting warm ground or something. But even as I said it, I felt a prickle of wrongness. The fog was moving against the wind. I could hear the breeze rustling the upper branches of the pines, but the fog was traveling in the opposite direction, flowing around the RV like water around a stone. "Brooklyn," Rachel said, her voice suddenly tight. "Do you hear that?" I went still, listening. At first, I heard only the normal forest sounds: wind, branches creaking, the distant hoot of an owl. Then, underneath it all, I heard something else, a whisper. Multiple whispers, actually, barely audible, coming from the fog itself. My throat felt dry. "Just the wind," I said, but I didn't believe it. The whispers grew louder. I couldn't make out words exactly, but they had a cadence to them, a rhythm that suggested language. And worse, so much worse, they seemed to be saying my name. Not Rachel's, mine. "Brooklyn, Brooklyn, Brooklyn." "We should go inside," Rachel said, backing away from the window. "Lock the doors." "The doors are locked," I said, but I checked anyway, moving through the RV to test each lock, each window latch. Everything was secure. The fog pressed against the glass, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. We couldn't see the fire ring, couldn't see the trees. Just that gray, writhing mist. The whispers continued all night. They never got loud enough that I could understand them clearly, but they never stopped either. Rachel and I huddled together in bed, both of us pretending to sleep, both of us lying rigid and awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear my name spoken in a dozen different voices, some old, some young, some that didn't sound quite human. Around 3 in the morning, something bumped against the side of the RV. A solid thump, like someone had walked into it in the dark. Rachel's hand found mine under the blanket, her grip painfully tight. Another bump, this time near the rear, then another near the cab. Something was circling us. I wanted to look, wanted to peek through the curtains and see what was out there, but some deep instinct kept me frozen. Looking felt dangerous. Acknowledging whatever was circling us felt like an invitation. The bumping continued for hours, irregular intervals that prevented us from predicting when the next one would come. Sometimes minutes would pass in silence. Sometimes they came rapid fire, one after another, like something was running around the perimeter. And always, underneath it all, the whispers. By the time dawn broke, I felt wrung out, exhausted in a way that went beyond mere lack of sleep. Rachel looked worse. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking as she tried to make coffee on the RV's small propane stove. The fog had lifted with the sunrise. Outside, the forest looked normal again. Beautiful even, with golden light filtering through the pines. But something had changed. The birds weren't singing. The usual morning chorus of wildlife was absent. The forest felt hollow, waiting. "We should leave," Rachel said. It wasn't a suggestion. "Yeah," I agreed. "Let's pack up and get out of here." But when Rachel turned the key in the ignition, the RV wouldn't start. The engine turned over once, twice, then just clicked uselessly. She tried again. Nothing. "Fuck," she breathed. "Fuck, fuck, fuck." I got out to check under the hood, though I knew nothing about engines. Everything looked intact, no obvious signs of tampering or damage. The battery terminals were clean and tight. All the hoses seemed connected. I had no idea what was wrong, and we had no way to call for help unless we hiked back to the ranger station. A 15-mile walk through dense forest. "Maybe it just needs to sit for a while," I said, hearing the false optimism in my own voice. "Battery might have drained overnight." Rachel looked at me like I was insane. "We both know that's not what's happening here." She was right, of course. Deep down, in that primitive part of the brain that our ancestors relied on for survival, I knew this wasn't mechanical failure. Something wanted us here. Something wanted us trapped. We spent the day trying to troubleshoot the RV, checking and rechecking everything we could think of. When that failed, we inventoried our supplies. We had food for maybe 4 more days if we were careful, water for 3. The satellite phone was our backup, but we'd have to hike a significant distance to get any kind of signal. These forests were notorious for poor reception, even with satellite technology. "Tomorrow," Rachel said as the sun began to set. "First light, we hike out together. We'll come back with a tow truck or something." I nodded, but dread was already building in my chest. The fog was returning. I could see it gathering between the trees, that same impossible thickness, that same wrong way of moving. Night fell fast. We locked ourselves in the RV again, every light turned on. Battery be damned. The whispers started almost immediately. "Brooklyn. We know you, Brooklyn. We know what you're afraid of." That last part was new. My skin went cold. "They're saying my name," I told Rachel. "Are they saying yours?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "Just yours. Only yours." The fog thickened until it was pressed against every window, so dense it looked almost solid. Through it, I started to see shapes, figures. They moved through the mist like shadows, human-shaped but wrong in their proportions. Too tall, or with limbs that bent at strange angles, or heads that tilted at impossible degrees. And then one of them spoke clearly, the voice cutting through the whispers like a knife. "You couldn't save her, Brooklyn." My heart stopped. That voice, I knew that voice. Mrs. Henderson. An elderly patient I'd lost 3 months ago. She'd come into the ER with chest pain, and I'd been the one to assess her initially. I'd made the call that it was indigestion, sent her home with antacids. She'd died of a massive heart attack 2 hours later. The hospital review board had cleared me. Her symptoms had been atypical. Her EKG had looked clean, but I'd carried that guilt ever since. I saw her face every time I closed my eyes. "You were lazy." Mrs. Henderson's voice continued from the fog. "You were tired. You wanted your shift to end, so you took the easy answer, and I died because of it." "That's not—" I started, but my voice broke. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Brooklyn, don't listen to it. It's not real. It's not her." But more voices were joining in now. Other patients I'd lost over the years. A teenager who'd overdosed, whose stomach I'd pumped but not quickly enough. A construction worker who'd bled out from a severed artery despite everything we'd tried. A young mother who'd gone into cardiac arrest during what should have been a routine procedure. They spoke from the fog, listing my failures, describing in detail how they'd died, what it had felt like, how scared they'd been. Each word was a knife in my chest. I knew, rationally, I knew, that these weren't the actual dead speaking, but they knew things. Private things, details I'd never told anyone, shame I'd carried in silence. "You're afraid you're not good enough," said the teenager's voice. "You're afraid that one day you'll make a mistake so big that everyone will see you for the fraud you are. You're afraid you don't deserve love," said the construction worker. "That's why you push Rachel away whenever she gets too close. You're afraid of being alone," said the young mother. "Afraid that when you die, no one will remember you mattered." Each accusation was true. Each fear was something I'd buried deep, tried to ignore, tried to outrun by working harder, being better, never stopping long enough to face the darkness inside me. Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't stop them. Rachel was holding me, saying something, but I couldn't hear her over the voices. The fog was inside my head now, probing through my memories, pulling out every moment of shame and regret and fear. Then the RV lurched. Something had grabbed it from outside. The entire vehicle tilted, lifted an inch off its tires, then dropped back down with a crash that sent us tumbling. Dishes fell from cabinets. The propane tank tore loose from its housing with a shriek of metal. Rachel screamed. I managed to catch myself against the counter, my elbow cracking against the edge hard enough to send lightning bolts of pain up my arm. The RV tilted again, this time more severely. We were being flipped. Whatever was out there in the fog had the strength to overturn a 12,000-pound vehicle. "The door!" Rachel shouted. "We have to get out." "We can't go out there," I shouted back. But we didn't have a choice. The RV was tilting further, 45 degrees now, everything sliding toward one wall. If it flipped completely, we'd be crushed inside. Rachel made the decision for us. She lunged for the door, threw the lock, and shoved it open. The fog poured in immediately, so thick I could barely see her, even though she was 3 feet away. "Rachel!" I screamed, reaching for her. Her hand found mine in the murk. Together, we stumbled out of the RV just as it completed its roll, the entire structure crashing onto its side with a sound like thunder. Glass shattered. Metal shrieked. Something inside, the propane tank probably, exploded with a dull whump. We ran. I don't remember deciding to run. It was pure animal instinct, blind panic. Our hands locked together as we crashed through the fog and into the forest. Branches whipped at our faces. Roots tried to trip us. The fog clung to us like wet cloth, and through it, I could hear those voices still calling my name, accusing, condemning. "Brooklyn, you can't run from yourself, Brooklyn. We're everything you fear. We're everything you've done wrong. We're inside you." I wanted to stop, to cover my ears, to curl into a ball and wait for it to end. But Rachel kept pulling me forward, her grip on my hand the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When we finally stopped, gasping, I realized we were completely lost. The fog had disoriented us utterly. I had no idea which direction the campsite was, which direction was out, which direction was anything. "Rachel," I panted. "Rachel, I can't. I don't know where." "Shh," she hissed, pressing her finger to my lips. "Listen." I listened. At first I heard only our ragged breathing and my pulse hammering in my ears. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Multiple sets of them, moving through the fog around us. Circling. And with them came that chorus of whispers, but different now. Hungry. "They feed on fear," Rachel whispered directly into my ear. "That's what this is. They fed on yours, and now they're stronger." "How do you?" My grandmother was from Louisiana, Cajun. She told stories about things in the swamps and forests, things that hunted people who wandered too far from the light. She called them rougarou, but that's not quite right. They're older, hungrier. What do we do? Rachel's hand was shaking in mine. We face them, or we die running. Neither option sounded good, but at least one of them felt like a choice. The footsteps were getting closer. I could see shapes in the fog now, tall and skeletal, with heads that elongated backward into impossible shapes. Their eyes, if they had eyes, reflected the moonlight that barely penetrated the mist. "Brooklyn," one of them said, and this time it was my mother's voice. My mother, who'd died of cancer when I was 17. "Baby girl, you were never strong enough. That's why I left. That's why everyone leaves." Something snapped inside me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the final straw of hearing my dead mother's voice used as a weapon. But suddenly, I was angry instead of afraid. "Shut up," I said, my voice hoarse. "Shut the fuck up. You're not my mother. You're not any of them. You're just parasites. You're nothing but fear in a fancy costume." The shapes in the fog recoiled slightly. The whispers faltered. "That's it," Rachel breathed. "Keep going." "I've made mistakes," I continued, and now I was shouting into the fog, into those distorted shapes, into my own terror. "I've lost patience. I've hurt people I loved. I'm scared all the fucking time. But I'm here. I'm alive. And you, whatever you are, you don't get to use my guilt against me anymore." The fog began to thin. Just slightly, but enough that I could see Rachel clearly beside me, her face fierce with pride and love. But the shapes weren't retreating. If anything, they were coming closer. And as the fog thinned, I could see them more clearly, and I wished desperately that I couldn't. They weren't entirely corporeal. They flickered in and out of existence like images projected onto smoke. But where they were solid, they were nightmare material. Human bodies stretched and distorted, skin the color of old bruises, mouths that opened too wide filled with too many teeth. And their eyes, when I could see them, were completely black. Empty. Void. One of them reached out a hand toward me. Its fingers were too long, each one jointed in 3 places instead of 2. The nails were yellowed and cracked. I grabbed a fallen branch from the ground. A pathetic weapon, but it was something. "Don't," I warned. The thing tilted its head, studying me. Then it smiled, and I saw that its mouth extended back to its ears, a wound across its face. "You think you've conquered fear?" it said, and this time the voice was just sound, not mimicking anyone I knew. "You've only scratched the surface. Let us show you what terror really is." It lunged. I swung the branch with all my strength. The wood passed through the thing like it was made of smoke, but where it connected, the creature shrieked and recoiled. Apparently they could be hurt, even if they couldn't quite be touched. "Run!" Rachel screamed, and we were running again, crashing through the underbrush, the fog thick around us but not quite as suffocating as before. Behind us, the creatures gave chase. I could hear them moving through the forest impossibly fast, their shrieks echoing off the trees. But I could also hear something else now. Water. Running water. "There," Rachel pointed, and through the thinning fog I saw it. A creek, narrow but moving fast, cutting through the forest floor. We splashed into it, the cold water shocking against our legs, and immediately the pursuing shrieks grew distant. The creatures stopped at the water's edge, unwilling or unable to cross. "Water," Rachel gasped. "Holy shit, my grandmother was right about that too. Running water. They can't cross it." We stood in the creek, holding on to each other, watching the shapes pace along the bank. The fog was dispersing rapidly now, and in the growing moonlight I could see that the creatures were less defined, like they needed the fog to maintain their form. But we couldn't stay in the creek forever. The water was freezing, and I could already feel numbness creeping into my feet. And I had no idea where this creek led, whether it would take us toward help or deeper into the forest. "We follow the water," Rachel decided, reading my thoughts. "Creeks lead to rivers. Rivers lead to civilization." It was as good a plan as any. We started walking, staying in the middle of the creek where the current was strongest, our feet stumbling over smooth stones and tangled roots. The creatures followed along the banks for a while, keeping pace, but gradually they fell behind. Without the fog, they seemed weaker, less substantial. We walked for hours. My legs were numb. My teeth were chattering so hard I bit my tongue and tasted blood. Rachel was in similar shape, her lips blue in the moonlight, her whole body shaking. But we kept going, because stopping meant death. Around what I guessed was 3 in the morning, the creek widened into a small pond, and on the far side I saw lights. A house. Salvation. "Come on," I urged, pulling Rachel forward. "We're almost there." We dragged ourselves out of the water and across the muddy bank. The house was dark except for a single porch light, but it was real, solid, blessedly normal. I pounded on the door, not caring about the time, not caring about anything except getting inside. An elderly man answered, shotgun in hand, his face suspicious. "The hell are y'all doing out here this time of night?" "Please," I gasped. "We were camping. Something attacked us. We need help." He looked us over, soaking wet, covered in mud and scratches, clearly terrified, and his expression softened. He lowered the gun and stepped aside. "Get in here. I'll call the sheriff." The inside of his house was warm and smelled like coffee and old wood. He wrapped us in blankets and made us sit by a space heater while he talked on his landline. I couldn't follow the conversation. My brain was shutting down, the adrenaline that had kept me going finally draining away. Rachel's hand found mine under the blanket. She was staring at nothing, her eyes hollow. "What were they?" I whispered. "I don't know," she said. "My grandmother's stories never gave them a name. Just said they were old. Older than the tribes, older than the settlers. They've always been here in the deep woods and the places where people don't go anymore." The sheriff arrived an hour later, along with a deputy. They took our statements, sent search parties to find our campsite and the RV. I told them a sanitized version. We'd heard noises, panicked, our RV had been vandalized and overturned. We'd run and gotten lost. I didn't mention the fog or the voices or the creatures. I could see in Rachel's eyes that she wouldn't either. They found the RV around dawn. It was indeed overturned, the propane tank ruptured, everything inside destroyed. But the sheriff said it looked like vandalism, probably local kids or maybe a bear. I nodded and agreed, even though I'd seen the handprints in the mud around the wreckage. Handprints far too large to be human, with too many fingers. We gave up camping after that. Rachel sold the RV for scrap. We tried to go back to normal, but normal felt like a joke now. I'd look at her sometimes and see the hollowness still there, the knowledge that we'd brushed against something that shouldn't exist. The worst part, though, was the fog. It followed me home. Not physically. There was no supernatural mist rolling through Houston's streets. But now, whenever fog appeared, whenever the weather turned misty or humid, I heard whispers. Faint, barely audible, but there. "Brooklyn. We know where you live now, Brooklyn. We know where you sleep." The fears they'd dragged out of me didn't go away. If anything, they were stronger now. I'd wake in the middle of the night convinced I'd made a fatal mistake with a patient, that someone had died because I wasn't good enough. I'd pull away when Rachel tried to get close, terrified that my damage would somehow infect her. "You need to talk to someone," Rachel said one morning, 3 weeks after Kasachi. "A therapist, someone who can help." "And tell them what?" I asked. "That I was attacked by my own fears given form in the Louisiana woods? Tell them you experienced trauma," she said gently. "That's what it was, Brooklyn. Trauma. Whether those things were real, or hallucinations brought on by stress or carbon monoxide from the RV or whatever, we went through something terrible, and we need help processing it." She was right, of course. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in PTSD. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. The sessions helped, slowly, incrementally, but I still hear the whispers sometimes, on foggy mornings, in the quiet moments before sleep, reminding me that they're out there, in the deep places, in the forgotten corners where the old things still hunt. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that if I ever go back, if I'm ever foolish enough or unlucky enough to return to those woods, they'll be waiting. They'll always be waiting. Because they know me now. They've tasted my fears, mapped the landscape of my guilt and shame and terror, and they're hungry for more. The fog whispered my fears aloud, and now it whispers them still, in every mist, in every shadow, in every moment when I'm alone with my thoughts. They'll never let me go. Not completely. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake, that makes me check the locks twice and leave every light burning, is that I'm not sure I deserve to be let go. Maybe the fog was right about me all along. Story 3. I'm Adam. I'm 34. I heard footsteps at the Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina. Marching in sync. That's what I tell myself now when the therapist asks me to ground myself in facts. State your name. State your age. State where it happened. But the truth is, those footsteps weren't the beginning. They were just the first thing I couldn't explain away. My wife, Rachel, and I had rented the RV on a whim. Well, not exactly a whim, more like a desperate attempt to save something that was quietly dying between us. 8 years of marriage, and we'd become roommates who occasionally had sex and split the bills. The kind of couple that eats dinner in silence, scrolling through phones, because we'd already said everything there was to say. The Uwharrie seemed perfect. Remote enough to force us to actually talk to each other, but not so isolated that we'd be completely off the grid. The National Forest sprawled across the Piedmont region of North Carolina. All rolling hills thick with oak and pine, with trails that wound through former gold mining country. The ranger at the entrance station had been friendly enough, a stocky woman in her 50s named Brenda who'd given us a map and warned us about the wild boar that sometimes roamed near the campsites. "Don't leave food out," she'd said, tapping the map with a chewed-up pen. "And if you hear something moving around at night, just make noise. They'll usually move on." Rachel had thanked her with that tight smile she uses when she's being polite but not really listening. We'd driven the RV deeper into the forest, following narrow dirt roads that barely accommodated the vehicle's width. I'd booked us a spot at the far end of the campground, Site 47, which according to the website offered maximum privacy and immersion in nature. What it offered, I discovered as we pulled in around 4 in the afternoon, was a clearing surrounded by such dense forest that the sunlight barely penetrated. The trees here were old growth, their trunks thick and twisted, their branches creating a canopy so complete that it felt like driving into a tunnel. Our site had a concrete pad for the RV, a picnic table that had seen better days, and a fire ring made from stacked stones. "It's nice," Rachel said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's quiet," I replied. We set up in silence. I handled the RV's electrical hookup and water connection while Rachel arranged things inside, which was her way of avoiding me. By the time everything was ready, the sun was starting its descent, and the forest had taken on that particular quality of twilight where shadows seem to multiply and deepen. I suggested we eat outside, try to enjoy the evening, maybe have that conversation we'd been avoiding for months. Rachel agreed, probably because she was tired of fighting, or maybe just tired in general. We'd brought pre-made sandwiches from a deli in Troy, and we ate them at the picnic table while darkness gathered around us like a slow-rising flood. That's when I first heard them. Footsteps. Not the random crunch of an animal moving through underbrush. Not the sporadic sounds of someone hiking past. These were measured rhythmic footsteps, and they were marching in perfect synchronization. Left, right, left, right. The sound came from somewhere in the trees to the north of our site, maybe 50 yards away, though it was hard to judge distance in the growing darkness. "Do you hear that?" I asked Rachel. She paused mid-bite, tilting her head. "Hear what?" "Those footsteps. Someone's walking out there." We both listened. The footsteps continued, that same steady cadence, neither approaching nor receding, just circling somewhere in the darkness beyond our little pool of light. "Maybe it's another camper," Rachel said, but she didn't sound convinced. "At this hour? In the middle of the woods?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own pulse in my ears, even the usual forest sounds. Insects, birds settling for the night, the rustle of leaves, seemed to have been swallowed by something vast and hungry. "See?" Rachel said. "Probably just someone walking back to their site." But there were no other sites in this direction. Site 47 was the end of the line, the last clearing before the forest became truly wild. I checked the map. Beyond us there was nothing but miles of woods stretching toward the Yadkin River Valley. I didn't argue with her. We finished our sandwiches in uncomfortable silence, and then Rachel announced she was going to bed. It was barely 8:30, but I didn't protest. We'd driven 4 hours to get here, and the tension between us was exhausting in ways that physical labor never could be. Inside the RV, we prepared for bed with the practiced efficiency of people who'd shared a space for years. Rachel took the bedroom in back while I made up the convertible dinette near the front. This had been our arrangement since we'd stopped having sex 6 months ago. We'd tell people it was because the RV bed was small, because one of us snored, because we were just more comfortable with separate sleeping spaces. All true and all lies. I lay on the thin mattress, listening to the creaks and settling sounds of the RV, the occasional drip of water from the sink faucet that I'd meant to tighten. Through the small windows, I could see nothing but darkness. No stars, no moonlight, just an absolute blackness that seemed to press against the glass. The footsteps started again at midnight. I know it was midnight because I'd been checking my phone obsessively, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that weighted my limbs. The sound began the same way it had before, that steady, synchronized marching, left, right, but this time it was closer, much closer. I sat up on the dinette bed, my heart suddenly pounding. The footsteps weren't just near our sight now, they were circling the RV itself. I could track their progress by sound alone, around the passenger side, past the rear bedroom where Rachel slept, along the driver's side, back to the front. A complete circuit that took maybe 30 seconds, and then the pattern repeated. My rational mind tried to supply explanations. Someone playing a prank. A confused hiker with a strange gait, but the footsteps were too perfect, too mechanical, and there were too many of them. Because now that I was fully alert and listening with every fiber of my being, I could distinguish at least 4 separate sets of feet, all moving in exact unison, all maintaining the same distance from each other as they circled our RV like sharks around a bleeding swimmer. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight function, then crept to the side window and pulled back the curtain. The beam of light revealed nothing but trees and darkness. I swept it back and forth, searching for movement for the source of those impossible footsteps. The light caught the rough bark of oaks, the carpet of pine needles on the ground, the rusted fire ring. Empty. Nothing there. But the footsteps continued. I rushed to the window on the opposite side, then to the rear bedroom. "Rachel," I hissed, shaking her shoulder. "Rachel, wake up." She groaned and rolled over. "What?" "Listen. Do you hear it?" We both went still. The footsteps continued their endless circuit, close enough now that I could hear the slight variations in the sound as they passed over different terrain. The soft thud on pine needles, the scrape across exposed root, the crunch through dead leaves. Rachel's face went pale in the dim light from my phone. "What is that?" "I don't know. Is someone out there?" "I don't see anyone." The footsteps stopped. This time the silence was worse, because now we were both awake, both alert, both straining to hear what would happen next. Seconds ticked by. My phone's battery indicator showed 82%. The digital clock on the dashboard read 12:07 a.m. Then came the knocking, not on the door, not even on the walls of the RV. The sound came from beneath us. From the undercarriage, a steady, rhythmic rapping that seemed to emanate from every part of the floor at once. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. Like something was systematically testing every square inch of the RV's belly, looking for a way in. Rachel grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Adam, what the fuck is happening?" "I don't know," I said again, and hated how useless those words sounded. The knocking continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes. Then it stopped as abruptly as it had begun, and the footsteps resumed their march, this time moving away from us, back into the forest, that same synchronized cadence fading gradually until I could no longer distinguish it from the other sounds of the night. Rachel was shaking. I realized I was, too. "We're leaving," she said. "Right now. We're getting in this fucking RV and we're driving out of here." "Okay," I agreed immediately. We scrambled to get dressed, throwing on whatever clothes we could find in the dark. I made my way to the driver's seat while Rachel secured loose items in the back, both of us moving with the jerky, panicked efficiency of people who knew they were in danger even if they couldn't articulate why. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. I tried again. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, but the engine didn't turn over. Didn't even try to catch. Not the labored grinding of a dying battery or a flooded engine. Just nothing, as if the RV had been completely drained of whatever force made it a vehicle instead of just a metal box. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I tried a third time, a fourth, pumping the gas pedal, adjusting the choke, doing everything I'd learned from my father's old truck. The RV refused to respond. Rachel appeared beside me, her face ghostly in the weak glow of the dashboard. "Why isn't it starting?" "I don't know. It was fine yesterday. Everything was fine." "Try again." I did. Same result. The battery had enough juice to power the lights, but the engine might as well have been a solid block of metal for all the life it showed. "We'll walk out," Rachel said. "It's what, 3 miles back to the main road? We can make it." I looked out the windshield at the darkness beyond our headlights. The idea of walking through those trees, where we'd just heard those footsteps, where something had been knocking on the underside of our RV, filled me with a dread so profound I could taste it like copper on my tongue. "In the dark?" I asked. "We have flashlights. We have phones." "Rachel, something is out there." "I know that. That's why we need to leave." She was right, of course. Staying here wasn't an option. But the thought of stepping outside, of being exposed and vulnerable in that darkness, made my legs feel like water. In the end, we compromised. We'd wait until dawn, just a few hours away, and then we'd walk out together. If the RV still wouldn't start, we'd leave it and come back with help. The decision made, we huddled together on the dinette bed, both of us too frightened to sleep, jumping at every sound from outside. The footsteps returned twice more before dawn, each time circling closer, each time stopping just short of the RV before retreating. The knocking came once, briefer this time, almost exploratory, like something was learning the contours of our shelter, memorizing its shape and structure for future reference. When the first gray light of dawn finally began to filter through the windows, I felt a surge of relief so intense I nearly wept. Daylight meant rationality. Daylight meant we could see what we were dealing with. Daylight meant escape. Rachel and I prepared to leave with grim determination. We packed a small backpack with water, snacks, our phones, and a first aid kit. I found the tire iron under the driver's seat and carried it like a club. It was a pathetic weapon, but it made me feel marginally less helpless. The moment of stepping outside was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to barricade the door, to hide, but Rachel was depending on me. And more than that, staying was just a slower form of surrender. Whatever was out here, we couldn't wait it out. I opened the door. The morning was cold and still, the forest shrouded in a mist that turned the trees into vague suggestions of themselves. Our breath plumed white in the chill air. The campsite looked exactly as we'd left it yesterday. The picnic table, the fire ring, the tire tracks from where we'd pulled in. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place, except for the footprints. They circled the RV in a perfect ring, pressed deep into the soft earth. But they weren't boot prints or shoe prints. They were bare feet. Adult-sized, but with toes that seemed too long, too articulated, pressed into the ground with the deep impressions of something very heavy. And there were dozens of them, layered over each other in that same synchronized pattern we'd heard, like soldiers marching in formation, around and around and around. Rachel saw them at the same time I did. She made a small sound in her throat, something between a whimper and a retch. "Don't look at them," I said. "Just follow the road. Stay close to me." We started walking. The dirt road that led back to the main campground was barely wide enough for the RV, hemmed in on both sides by forest so dense it might as well have been walls. Our footsteps sounded obscenely loud in the morning quiet, crunching through gravel and dead leaves. I kept the tire iron ready, my head swiveling constantly, searching the trees for movement. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. The road wound through the forest, occasionally opening into small clearings where other campsites sat empty. We passed Site 45, then 43. Each one was unoccupied, which struck me as odd for a Saturday morning in early October, when the weather was perfect for camping. Then Rachel grabbed my arm. "Adam, look." She was pointing back the way we'd come. I turned and felt my stomach drop. Our footprints were gone. The dirt road showed no sign of our passage, as if we'd been walking on air. But more disturbing than that, there were new prints now. Those same bare feet, that same deep impression, appearing on the road ahead of us, leading in the direction we were heading. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered. I wanted to agree, to find some rational explanation. Maybe we were confused about the direction. Maybe these were old prints we just hadn't noticed. Maybe. The footsteps started again. This time I could see them. Not who was making them, but the result. The prints appeared on the road ahead of us, one after another, left, right, pressed into the dirt by invisible feet, marching toward us in that same synchronized rhythm. And they weren't alone. More prints appeared on either side, in the forest itself, dozens of them, all converging on our position. The sound was deafening now, a percussion of synchronized footfalls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Run!" Rachel screamed. We ran. The tire iron fell from my grip as I grabbed Rachel's hand and we sprinted down the road, our backpack bouncing against my shoulders. The footsteps followed, always the same distance behind us. That perfect mechanical cadence that never speeded up or slowed down, just maintained its inexorable pace. Site 41, Site 39. The numbers decreased, but the entrance never got closer, as if the road was stretching ahead of us, adding distance faster than we could cover it. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. Rachel was sobbing as she ran, great gasping breaths that seemed to tear from her throat. The footsteps were getting closer. I could feel them now, a vibration through the ground, like the march of an army. The morning mist seemed to thicken around us, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. The trees became indistinct shadows. The road ahead disappeared into white nothing. "The trees!" I shouted to Rachel. "Get off the road!" We crashed into the forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots catching at our feet. The undergrowth was dense and hostile, grabbing at our clothes like clutching hands. I kept hold of Rachel's hand, dragging her forward when she stumbled, refusing to let go even when my grip became slick with sweat. The footsteps followed us into the forest. But now they were different. Not synchronized anymore. These were the sounds of pursuit, of multiple things crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth or rhythm, just pure, relentless hunting drive. We burst into a small clearing, and I saw it ahead, a structure of some kind barely visible through the mist. A shed or cabin, made from weathered wood that had gone gray with age. Its door hung open like a mouth. I didn't hesitate. We ran for it. The interior was dark and smelled of rot and old animal musk. I could make out vague shapes, a broken table, some rusted tools, what might have been shelving collapsed against one wall. Rachel and I pressed ourselves against the far corner, trying to quiet our ragged breathing, trying to become invisible in the shadows. The footsteps entered the clearing. Through gaps in the shed's walls I could see movement in the mist. Shapes, tall and thin, moving with that same mechanical precision, spacing themselves evenly around the shed. I counted at least 8 of them, though there might have been more hidden in the fog. They didn't move like humans. Their gait was wrong, too smooth, as if their joints bent in ways ours didn't. And they were silent except for their footfalls. No breathing, no speech, no sound of clothing rustling or equipment rattling. One of them moved closer to the shed's door. The mist parted enough for me to see it clearly. I will never forget what I saw. I've tried, God knows I've tried, but the image is burned into my brain like a brand. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with proportions that mimicked human anatomy but stretched it to grotesque extremes. Its limbs were too long, its torso too narrow. Its skin was the color of dead leaves, mottled and rough. But it was the face that broke something in my mind. It had no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a smooth expanse of that dead leaf skin, perfectly flat and blank. Yet I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. It tilted its head, the movement mechanical and bird-like, and took a step toward the door. Rachel's hand found mine in the darkness. She was shaking so hard I could hear her teeth chattering. The thing paused at the threshold. Its blank face turned slowly, scanning the interior of the shed. I pressed myself harder against the wall, as if I could somehow phase through the wood and escape. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure it could hear it. Then it stepped inside. The smell that came with it was indescribable. Not quite rot, not quite anything organic, but something fundamentally wrong, like the scent of a place where natural laws had been suspended. It moved deeper into the shed, its footsteps making that same measured sound. Left, right. It stopped directly in front of us. I could have reached out and touched it. The thought made my gorge rise. Rachel had gone completely still beside me, so motionless she might have stopped breathing entirely. The thing stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Its blank face tilted down, as if studying us. I wanted to close my eyes, to hide like a child from a nightmare, but I couldn't. Some deep survival instinct kept me frozen, kept me watching. Then it turned and walked back toward the door. The other shapes in the clearing began to move, falling back into their synchronized formation. The thing that had been inside the shed joined them, taking its place in the line, and then, as if responding to some unheard signal, they all began to march. Left, right. They circled the shed once, twice, 3 times. Then they marched back into the forest, their footsteps fading gradually until I could no longer distinguish them from the ambient sounds of the woods. Rachel and I stayed frozen in that corner for a long time after they'd gone, too terrified to move, too traumatized to speak. When we finally did emerge, the sun had burned away most of the mist, and the forest looked almost normal in the late morning light. We found the road again and followed it in the opposite direction from our campsite, moving quickly but no longer running. Both of us too exhausted for panic. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that could encompass what we'd experienced. It took us 3 hours to reach the main road, and when we did, we flagged down the first car we saw. An elderly couple from Charlotte who drove us to the ranger station. Brenda was there, looking confused when we burst in babbling about things in the forest, about footsteps and blank faces and being trapped. She made us sit down, brought us water, called the local sheriff. When pressed for details, when forced to actually articulate what had happened, our story sounded insane even to my own ears. Rachel broke down crying. I sat in numb silence. The sheriff, a patient man named Weston, took notes, but his expression was skeptical. They sent a team to retrieve our RV. When they got to Site 47, everything was exactly as we'd left it. The RV started on the first try. There were no footprints around it, bare or otherwise. No strange marks, no damage, nothing to support our story. The shed where we'd hidden didn't exist. They searched the area we described and found nothing but unbroken forest. Mass hallucination, the sheriff suggested gently. Sometimes stress and isolation can play tricks. Or maybe carbon monoxide from the RV? But I knew. Rachel knew. Something had been in those woods. Something that marched in perfect formation. Something that wore a mockery of human shape. Something that had studied us in that shed and chosen, for reasons I'll never understand, to let us live. We drove home in silence, in the rental car the sheriff arranged. Rachel filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Not because she blamed me, she said, but because she couldn't look at me without remembering. Couldn't be in any quiet space without hearing those footsteps. I don't blame her. I hear them too. It's been 6 months now. I live in a city apartment where there's always noise, always people, always something to drown out the memory. But sometimes, late at night when the building is quiet, I hear them. Left, right, marching in the walls, circling my apartment in that same perfect synchronization. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just trauma manifesting as auditory hallucinations. I tell myself that whatever was in the Uwharrie National Forest is still there, that it can't reach me here, that I'm safe. But then I remember that blank face tilting down to study me in the shed's darkness, and I remember that it let me go, The question that keeps me awake, the one that makes my therapist frown and increase my medication, is simple. Why? Why did it let us go? Was it mercy? Disinterest? Or was it something else entirely? A decision based on criteria I can't comprehend, made by an intelligence that operates on frequencies I can't perceive? Last week, I saw Rachel for the first time since the divorce was finalized. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory, to sign some final papers. She looked terrible, hollow-eyed, gaunt, like she hadn't slept in weeks. "I hear them, too," she said quietly before we'd even sat down. "Every night, getting closer." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was just trauma, just her mind playing tricks. But I couldn't lie to her. Not about this. "Me too," I admitted. We sat there in that busy coffee shop, surrounded by the cheerful noise of people living normal lives, people who'd never stood in a shed while something inhuman studied them with its absence of a face. And we both knew, without saying it, that this wasn't over, because the footsteps are getting closer for me too. And last night, when I jerked awake at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, I saw something through my apartment window. A shape, tall and thin, standing on the street below, its blank face tilted up toward my building. It stood there for 10 minutes, not moving except for that mechanical tilt of its head. Then it turned and walked away, its footsteps lost in the general noise of the city. But it knows where I am now. They know where we are, and sooner or later they're going to come back. Not with the chase, not with the terror of pursuit. They'll come back with that same patient, synchronized march. They'll circle whatever space I'm in, my apartment, my workplace, wherever I run, and eventually one of them will step through the door, and this time I don't think they'll leave. I've started sleeping with the lights on, all of them, every lamp, every overhead fixture, blazing bright enough to make my utility bills astronomical, because whatever those things are, they move through silence and darkness. Light and noise are the only defenses I have, but even those are failing. Last night the power went out in my building, just for 5 minutes. 5 minutes of pure darkness and the sudden absence of all the ambient noise I used to shield myself. And in that darkness, in that silence, I heard them. Not faint and distant anymore, not muffled by walls and windows. Crystal clear, as if they were standing right in my apartment. Left, right, marching in perfect unison, circling my bedroom, taking their time, relearning my space, preparing for whatever comes next. When the power came back on, my apartment was empty. But there were marks on the floor, visible only in certain light, faint impressions in the carpet, like something heavy had been standing there. Bare feet, too long, too articulated, arranged in a perfect circle around my bed. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know what happened. Need there to be a record, in case I disappear or worse, in case I'm found, but I'm not quite right. Not quite myself anymore, because I'm starting to understand something about those things in the Uwharrie forest. They don't just hunt. They don't just kill. They do something else, something I don't have words for. I see it in my reflection sometimes. My face looks the same, mostly. Same eyes, same nose, same mouth. But sometimes, when the light hits it just right, my features seem to smooth out, to flatten, to become less distinct. And my gait has changed. Rachel noticed it that day in the coffee shop, though she didn't say anything, but I saw the way her eyes widened when I walked toward her, saw the flash of recognition and terror. I'm walking differently now, more precisely, more synchronized, left, right, like I'm matching a cadence that only I can hear, like I'm falling into formation with something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. Sometimes I catch myself standing in my apartment, perfectly still, my head tilted in that mechanical bird-like way. I don't remember starting to stand there. Don't remember assuming that position. But there I am, frozen in place, and when I snap out of it, I don't know how much time has passed. Minutes? Hours? Days? The footsteps are inside my apartment now. I hear them constantly, that same marching rhythm. But when I look, there's never anything there. Just empty space where the sound insists something is walking. And I'm starting to wonder, starting to fear, that maybe I'm not hearing them at all. Maybe I'm making them. Maybe I'm one of them now. Or becoming one of them. My humanity slowly smoothing away like features eroding from a face until all that's left is that blank expanse and that endless mechanical march. I'm Adam. I'm 34. I went to Uharry National Forest and I heard footsteps marching in sync. But now, when I close my eyes, I can't remember what my face used to look like. Can't remember the exact sound of my own voice before it started to flatten, to lose its inflection and warmth. Can't remember what it felt like to be entirely human. The footsteps are here, right now, circling me as I type this, patient and relentless and perfectly synchronized. And I'm so tired of running, so tired of fighting, so tired of being afraid. Maybe if I just stand up, maybe if I just fall into step with them, maybe if I just start marching left, right, maybe then they'll stop hunting me. Maybe then I'll finally understand what they want. Maybe then I'll... Story 4. I'm Riley, 34. I saw an extra shadow at Devil's Den State Park, but no extra person. We pulled into the campground just before sunset, our rented RV lurching over potholes that seemed deeper than they should have been. Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas had been Marcus's idea. He'd found some blog post about how it was perfect for off-grid camping, real wilderness experience. None of that glamping bullshit. I'd agreed because I needed to get away from the city, from the job I'd just lost, from the apartment that felt like it was shrinking around me every day. Marcus was my college roommate, the kind of friend who calls once every 6 months but acts like no time has passed. He'd brought his girlfriend, Jessie, who I'd met exactly twice before. She was nice enough, I guess. Quiet. The kind of person who smiled with just her mouth. The third member of our group was Marcus's cousin, Tom, who I'd never met until he climbed into the RV that morning. Tom was loud where Jessie was quiet, always cracking jokes that landed somewhere between funny and uncomfortable. The park ranger who'd checked us in had been an older woman with a face like worn leather. She'd looked at our permits, then at us, then back at the permits. "You folks planning to stay the full week?" she'd asked. "That's the plan," Marcus had said, grinning. "Really disconnect, you know?" The ranger had nodded slowly. "Devil's Den gets its name for a reason. The Butterfield Overland Mail route used to run near here. A lot of people went missing along that stretch. Disappeared without a trace." She'd handed back our permits. "Stay on the marked trails, and if you hear anything strange at night, stay in your vehicle." "What kind of strange?" Tom had asked, leaning forward with theatrical interest. The ranger had just looked at him. "You'll know it when you hear it." We'd laughed about it as we drove to our site, Site 47, tucked deep into the park where the trees grew so thick they seemed to lean inward. But I'd noticed Marcus's hands were tight on the steering wheel. The first 2 days were perfect. We hiked the Yellow Rock Trail, swam in Lee Creek, cooked terrible meals on the RV's tiny stove, and drank cheap beer around a campfire that Tom kept feeding until it roared like something angry. Jessie took photographs with an old film camera, always wandering off to find the right angle, the right light. I read a book I'd been meaning to finish for 2 years. Marcus whittled sticks with a knife his grandfather had given him, creating a pile of shavings that grew into a small mountain by our fire pit. It was on the 3rd evening that I first noticed something wrong. We were sitting around the fire as the sun bled out behind the trees, painting everything in shades of rust and shadow. I'd been watching the flames, half listening to Tom tell some story about a disastrous camping trip from his youth, when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. A shadow, cast long by the firelight, stretched out from behind Marcus's chair. Not Marcus's shadow. I could see his clearly, moving when he moved. This was different, separate. It stood where no person stood, a dark silhouette that seemed almost human but not quite. The proportions were wrong, the head too large, the arms too long. I blinked, and it was gone. "You okay, Riley?" Jessie asked. She was looking at me with those 2 observant eyes of hers. "Yeah," I said. "Just thought I saw something." "Bear." Tom perked up. "I'd love to see a bear. From a safe distance, obviously. No, just nothing. Trick of the light. But I kept watching the shadows after that. They moved wrong around our campfire, stretching and contracting in ways that didn't match the flickering flames. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was tired, that the ranger's warning had gotten into my head. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside the RV. I lay in my bunk. Marcus and Jesse had taken the bed in back. Tom had the couch, and I'd gotten the fold-down bunk above the cab, listening. The footsteps were deliberate, circling the RV with a steady rhythm. Crunch, crunch, crunch on the fallen leaves. They passed beneath my window, and I held my breath, waiting to see what cast them. Nothing. The footsteps continued, but nothing passed by the window. I climbed down as quietly as I could and peered out the larger side window. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to paint the clearing in silver light. I could see our fire pit, reduced to embers. I could see the picnic table. I could see the trees standing silent at the edge of our site. And I could see the shadows. 5 of them. Dark shapes cast across the ground by nothing at all. They moved independently, circling the RV in that same steady rhythm. As I watched, one of them stopped. It turned, as if the non-existent thing casting it had turned to look up at me. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stood there in the dark RV, listening to those footsteps circle again and again, until finally, near dawn, they stopped. I didn't tell the others. What would I say? That I'd seen shadows without sources? They'd think I was cracking up, and maybe I was. I'd been under a lot of stress. Unemployment does things to your head. The 4th day started normal enough. Marcus wanted to explore some of the caves the park was famous for, so we packed water and flashlights and headed out on the Devil's Den Trail. The trail wound through thick forest, the kind where the canopy blocked out most of the sun and the air smelled like wet earth and decay. Jesse had stopped to photograph something, a cluster of mushrooms growing on a fallen log, when Tom pointed to something ahead on the trail. "Hey, is that someone else?" We all looked. There, maybe 50 yards ahead, was a figure standing motionless on the trail. It was too far to make out details, just a dark shape that could have been a person wearing a heavy coat or maybe just an oddly shaped tree trunk. "Hello," Marcus called out. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. We walked closer, our footsteps suddenly loud on the packed dirt. As we approached, I realized I could see trees through the figure, as if it was translucent, or as if it wasn't really there. What the hell? Tom's voice had lost its usual joking tone. When we got to where the figure had been standing, there was nothing, just the trail continuing into the forest. But the air felt wrong, thick and cold, like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in that one spot. "Did you guys see that?" I asked. My voice sounded thin. "I got a photo," Jessie said quietly. She was staring at her camera with a strange expression. "Well, what did you get?" Marcus asked, trying to sound jovial and failing. Jessie didn't answer. She just held out the camera so we could see the viewfinder. In the small display, we could see the trail, the trees, and where the figure had been standing. There was nothing. Nothing but shadows on the ground, shadows cast by something that wasn't there. "Camera malfunction," Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced. We decided to head back to camp. The caves could wait. None of us said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. Something was very wrong with this place. That afternoon, Marcus broke out the bourbon he'd been saving. We sat at the picnic table drinking in silence, watching the shadows lengthen as the sun moved across the sky. I counted them obsessively now. My shadow, Marcus's, Jesse's, Tom's. 4 shadows for 4 people. That's how it should be. But sometimes, just for a moment, there would be 5. "We should leave," I said finally. "Just pack up tonight and leave." "Because of what?" Marcus asked. "Some weird shadows? A trick of the light on the trail?" "You felt that cold spot," I said. "You saw that figure." "I saw something I can't explain," Marcus admitted. "But running away seems like an overreaction. We paid for the whole week. Besides, it's just our minds playing tricks. We're out here in the woods, the ranger told us that creepy story, and now we're seeing things. It's textbook suggestion. I don't think that's what this is, Jessie said. She'd been quiet all afternoon, and now she was staring at the tree line with an expression I couldn't read. I think something lives here. Something that doesn't want us here. Jesus Christ, Tom laughed, but it sounded forced. You guys are freaking me out. It's just shadows and cold air. There's a rational explanation for everything. Then explain the footsteps last night, I said. They all turned to look at me. What footsteps? Marcus asked slowly. So I told them. About waking up, about the circling steps, about the shadows moving independently. As I talked, I watched their faces change, skepticism giving way to unease. Why didn't you wake us up? Marcus asked. What would you have done? Come look at shadows with me? Tom had gone pale. My grandfather used to tell stories about things like this. Shadow people, he called them. Said they were spirits of people who died violent deaths, stuck between worlds. Said they collect shadows from the living. That's just a story, Jessie said, but her voice wavered. Is it? Tom looked at each of us. Because I haven't wanted to say anything, but I've been feeling watched since we got here. And this morning, when I went to brush my teeth, I saw something in the mirror, my reflection. But it moved wrong. It smiled when I wasn't smiling. The temperature seemed to drop. I pulled my jacket tighter. Okay, Marcus said, standing up abruptly. Okay, this is getting too weird. We're leaving first thing in the morning. We'll pack up, get some sleep, and at sunrise, we're out of here. Why not leave now? I asked. Because it's already getting dark and these roads are shit. I'm not driving that RV through these mountains in the dark. Marcus's jaw was set in that stubborn way I remembered from college. We'll be fine for one more night. We'll take shifts keeping watch. Nothing's going to happen. But I knew he was wrong. I could feel it in the air, that same cold thickness that had been on the trail. Something was coming. Something had been circling us since we arrived, getting closer each night. We started a fire as the sun set, building it bigger than we needed, as if the light could protect us. We sat close together, none of us wanting to admit how scared we were. Tom kept making jokes that fell flat. Jessie hadn't picked up her camera since we'd gotten back. Marcus whittled mechanically, creating stick after stick of nothing. I watched the shadows. They were all around us now, flickering in the firelight. Our 4 shadows cast by the flames, moving when we moved. But between them, in the spaces where no shadow should be, I saw others, dark shapes that had no source, that moved with their own intention. They crept closer to our circle of light, testing the boundaries. Do you see them? I whispered. Yes, Jessie said. Just that one word, barely audible. How many? Tom asked. His voice was shaking. I tried to count, but they kept shifting, multiplying. I don't know. Dozens. Maybe more. Marcus stood up suddenly, grabbing a flashlight. He turned it on and swept the beam across the clearing. In the bright LED light, the shadows should have vanished or moved. Instead, they remained, dark spots on the ground that the light couldn't penetrate. As the beam passed over them, they writhed. What the fuck? Marcus breathed. What the actual fuck? One of the shadows peeled itself off the ground. It rose up, becoming 3-dimensional, a dark figure shaped roughly like a person but wrong in every proportion. Its head was bulbous and featureless. Its arms reached down past where knees should be. It stood there swaying, like something learning to balance on legs for the first time. Then another shadow rose. And another. All around our campfire, the shadows were pulling themselves into vertical positions, becoming a silent crowd of watchers. Get in the RV, Marcus said. His voice was remarkably steady. Right now. Don't run. Just walk. We stood together, moving as a group toward the RV's door. The shadow figures didn't move, but I could feel them watching. Could feel something like hunger radiating from them. Tom reached the door first and yanked it open. We piled inside, Marcus pulling the door shut and locking it. We scrambled to close every curtain, block every window as if that would help. What are they? Jessie was crying now, silent tears running down her face. I don't know, Marcus said. He was checking the door lock over and over as if it might have stopped working in the last 5 seconds. Some kind of, I don't know, shadow people, Tom said. He was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees. My grandfather said they feed on fear, on life force. They take your shadow first, and then they take you. That's insane, Marcus said. That's not real. This isn't real. But outside we could hear them. Not footsteps this time. Something else. A sound like breathing. Like dozens of mouths inhaling and exhaling in unison. The RV began to rock gently, as if hands were pressing against it from all sides. I moved to one of the curtains and lifted it just an inch, peering out. The shadow figures were closer now, pressed up against the RV. In the moonlight, I could see them more clearly. They were definitely humanoid, but there was nothing human about them. They had no features, no faces, just smooth expanses of darkness. But I knew they were looking at us. Could feel their attention like a physical weight. As I watched, one of them pressed what would have been its hand against the window. The glass frosted over with cold, ice crystals spreading in fractal patterns. They're touching the RV, I said. Don't look at them, Tom said. My grandfather said you should never look directly at shadow people. It gives them power over you. Little late for that, Marcus muttered. He'd found his phone and was trying to get a signal. Nothing. No bars. Of course not. The breathing sounds grew louder. The rocking became more violent. A scrabbling noise started on the roof like claws or fingers trying to find purchase. They're trying to get in, Jessie said. She'd stopped crying and now sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. They want our shadows. They want us. They can't get in, Marcus said firmly. It's just a metal box. They're just, whatever they are, they can't hurt us in here. But even as he said it, the temperature in the RV began to drop. Our breath started to fog. Frost spread across the inside of the windows in impossible patterns. Not random crystals, but shapes that looked like reaching hands, screaming mouths, hollow eyes. The lights flickered. The battery-powered lantern we'd set on the counter dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. Check the shadows, Tom said suddenly. Check your shadows. Make sure they're still there. I looked down at where my shadow should have been cast by the lantern light. It was there, but it seemed faded somehow, less distinct than it should be. As I watched, it flickered, like a light bulb about to burn out. Mine's still there, Marcus said, but his voice was uncertain. I think. Jessie held up her hand in front of the lantern. Her shadow appeared on the wall, but it moved a split second after her hand moved. She jerked her hand down and the shadow followed, delayed, like a video call with bad lag. They're taking them, she whispered. They're taking our shadows. The scrabbling on the roof intensified. Something thudded against the door. Once, twice, 3 times, with enough force to make the whole RV shake. The breathing sounds became a chorus, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my stomach turn. It sounded wrong, like dozens of lungs that had never learned to breathe properly. We have to do something, I said. We can't just sit here and let them what? Marcus spun to face me. What do you think they're going to do, Riley? They're just shadows. They can't actually hurt us. As if in response, one of the window curtains twitched. We all stared at it. The curtain was moving on its own, pulling back slowly to reveal the window behind it. In the glass, I could see our reflections. The 4 of us huddled in the RV, looking terrified. But there was a 5th reflection. Standing behind us in the mirror was one of the shadow figures, tall and impossibly thin, its elongated arms reaching toward Tom's reflected shoulder. "Behind you!" Jessie screamed. Tom spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty space of the RV. But in the window's reflection, the shadow figure remained, and now it was touching Tom's reflection, its hand, if you could call it that, pressed against the back of his reflected head. Tom's eyes went wide, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His body went rigid, and then he started to shake. Not like a seizure. Worse than that. His whole body was vibrating as if something was trying to pull him apart from the inside. Marcus grabbed him, trying to hold him still, but Tom's shaking only got worse. His eyes rolled back, showing nothing but whites. His skin went gray, the color draining out of it like water from a punctured bag. "What's happening to him?" Marcus shouted. I looked back at the window. In the reflection, the shadow figure had both hands on Tom's reflected head now, and it was pulling something out of him, something dark and viscous that flowed from Tom's reflection into the shadow figure like smoke being inhaled. "It's taking his shadow," I said. "It's pulling his shadow right out of him. How do we stop it?" Marcus was panicking now, his voice cracking. "How do we fucking stop it?" I remembered something Tom had said, something about his grandfather's stories. "Don't look at them. Everyone close your eyes." "What good will that do?" Marcus asked, but Jessie was already squeezing her eyes shut. "Just do it." I closed my own eyes, blocking out the sight of the window, the reflection, the thing that was killing Tom. "Don't give them any attention. Don't acknowledge them." In the darkness behind my eyelids, I could still hear Tom's labored breathing, could still hear the chorus of wrong breathing from outside. But slowly, gradually, Tom's shaking began to subside. "Is it working?" Marcus asked. I could hear the strain in his voice, could imagine him standing there with his eyes closed, still holding on to Tom. "I think so," I said. "Just keep them closed. Don't look." We stood there in the dark for what felt like hours. The sounds outside continued. The breathing, the scrabbling, the gentle thudding against the RV's walls. But without our attention, without our fear feeding them, the sounds seemed to lose some of their intensity. Tom's breathing eventually steadied. "I'm okay," he croaked. "I'm okay." It let go. "Don't open your eyes," I warned. "Not yet." So we waited, 4 people standing in a dark RV with our eyes closed, while shadow figures pressed against the walls and windows around us. My legs began to ache. My back started to hurt. But I didn't open my eyes. Gradually, so slowly I almost didn't notice at first, the sounds outside began to fade. The breathing became quieter. The scrabbling stopped. The rocking of the RV ceased. I don't know how long we stood there in silence before Marcus finally spoke. "I think they're gone," he said. "Don't look yet," I said. "Give it more time." We waited another 10 minutes by my count, standing in complete darkness and silence. Finally, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I opened my eyes. The RV was just the RV. The frost on the windows had melted, leaving only streaks of water. The lantern burned steadily, and when I looked at the window, I saw only our 4 reflections staring back at me. No shadow figures. No fifth presence. "Okay," I said. "Okay, I think it's safe." The others opened their eyes. Tom immediately slumped against the counter, looking like he might pass out. His skin was still gray, and there were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there an hour ago. "What happened to me?" he asked weakly. "You were—" Marcus trailed off. "Your shadow. It was pulling your shadow out of you." Tom looked down at the floor where the lantern cast our shadows. His was there, but it was faded, translucent. When he moved his hand, the shadow moved, but it was dim, like a photocopy that had been made too many times. "I can barely see it," he whispered. "It took part of me. They took part of me." Jessie was checking her own shadow, holding her hands up to the light. "Mine's faded, too. Not as bad as Tom's, but it's definitely lighter than it should be." I checked mine. She was right. All of our shadows were diminished, washed-out versions of what they should be. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. "What happens when your shadow is gone?" None of us had an answer. We didn't sleep that night. We huddled together in the RV, keeping every light on, watching our shadows fade a little more with each passing hour. By the time dawn broke, Tom's shadow was barely visible. He looked terrible, pale, drawn, like someone recovering from a serious illness. "We're leaving," Marcus said as soon as there was enough light to see by. "Right now. We're getting the fuck out of here." We didn't argue. We didn't pack carefully. We just threw our things into bags and climbed into the RV. Marcus started the engine, and I've never heard a more beautiful sound than that motor turning over. We pulled out of Site 47 as the sun was rising, the trees casting long shadows across the dirt road. Normal shadows. Shadows that made sense. But as we passed the ranger station on our way out, I saw the old woman who'd checked us in. She was standing outside watching us go. And as we passed, She raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a warning. Behind her, cast by the rising sun, was her shadow, and another shadow beside it, and another, and another. A whole crowd of shadows with no sources, standing silent in the early morning light. I didn't tell the others. We were getting out. That was all that mattered. The drive back to civilization took 3 hours, but it felt like days. Tom dozed fitfully in the back, looking more dead than alive. Jessie stared out the window, not taking pictures, not speaking. Marcus gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I watched the shadows inside the RV, counting them obsessively. 4 shadows for 4 people. That's how it should be. But sometimes when the light shifted just right, I swear I saw a 5th shadow. Just for a moment. Just long enough to remind me that they'd touched us, that they'd taken something from us, that we'd left part of ourselves behind in those woods. We never talked about what happened at Devil's Den. What would be the point? No one would believe us. Hell, I'm not sure I believe it myself sometimes. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Tom never fully recovered. His shadow never came back completely. On sunny days, if you look closely, you can barely see it. Just a faint outline where there should be solid darkness. He moved to Arizona 6 months ago, said he wanted to live somewhere with a lot of sun. I think he's hoping the light will somehow restore what was taken. I don't have the heart to tell him I don't think that's how it works. Jessie stopped taking pictures. She said she developed that roll of film from the trip, but every single frame came out wrong. Just shadows. Nothing but shadows in every shot. She burned the negatives. Marcus started seeing a therapist. He told her we had a bad camping trip, that something traumatic happened. He doesn't specify what. The therapist thinks he has PTSD. Maybe he does. As for me, I can't stand shadows anymore. I keep my apartment blazingly bright, lights on in every room, all the time. My electric bill is insane. I don't care. When I have to go out at night, I stick to well-lit streets. I avoid parks, forests, anywhere with too many trees and not enough light. And I check my shadow constantly, obsessively, making sure it's still there, still moving when I move, still the right shape in darkness. Because every day it seems a little fainter. Every day it's a little harder to see. I looked it up once, what Tom's grandfather had said about shadow people. About how they take your shadow first, and then they take you. The stories all say the same thing. Once they've marked you, once they've touched your shadow, they can always find you. They'll come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, when the darkness is deep enough and you're alone enough, they'll come back to finish what they started. Last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of breathing outside my apartment door. That same wrong rhythm, dozens of lungs that never learned to breathe properly. I lay in bed, frozen, listening to them circle my door, listening to them wait. I didn't open the door, I didn't look through the peephole. I just closed my eyes and waited for dawn, the same way I had in the RV. When the sun came up, the breathing stopped. But when I finally opened my door to get my newspaper, there were marks on the floor outside. Dark stains in the shape of handprints, dozens of them, forming a circle around my door. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened. Because I think they're getting closer. Because my shadow is almost gone now. Just the faintest outline, barely visible even in direct sunlight. Tom called me yesterday. He was crying, said his shadow had finally disappeared completely. Said he could feel them waiting for him, even in the bright Arizona desert. Said he'd decided to take a drive into the mountains, try to find some peace before the end. I haven't been able to reach him since that call. Jessie texted me this morning. Just 3 words. They found me. Marcus hasn't answered his phone in 2 days. And me? I'm sitting here in my too bright apartment, watching my shadow fade to nothing, listening to the breathing sounds that get louder every night. They're coming for me. Maybe tonight, maybe next week, but they're coming. I saw an extra shadow at Devil's Den State Park, but no extra person. Now I barely cast a shadow at all. And I understand, finally, what the ranger was trying to warn us about. What Tom's grandfather tried to explain. The shadow people don't just take your shadow. They replace it. I looked in the mirror this morning, and my reflection smiled at me. I wasn't smiling. Story 5. It won't be long now. The Gossiping Trees. My name is Thomas. I'm 34 years old, and I came to the Fish Lake National Forest in Utah because my marriage was ending, and I needed to hear something other than silence. The divorce papers sat unsigned in my apartment in Denver, and my lawyer kept calling with that gentle, practiced concern that made me want to drive my phone into a wall. So I hooked up the RV, a 23-foot Winnebago I'd bought during happier times, loaded my golden retriever Apollo into the passenger seat, and drove west until the mountains swallowed the highway behind me. Fish Lake sprawls across 250,000 acres of high-altitude wilderness, famous for its vast stand of quaking aspens, the Pando Grove, supposedly the largest living organism on Earth. I'd read about it in a travel magazine Sarah left behind when she moved out. She'd circled it in red pen with a note, "We should go here someday." That someday never came, so I went alone. Apollo pressed his nose against the window as we climbed into the forest, his tail thumping against the center console. He was 3 years old, all muscle and energy, with that relentless optimism that made me feel guilty for being so goddamn miserable all the time. Sarah had wanted to take him when she left. I'd fought her on it. The only thing I'd fought her on, and won. Now he was all I had. The ranger station at the forest entrance was closed when I arrived, a handwritten sign taped to the door. Back in 30 minutes. See, I waited 20 minutes, Apollo circling the parking lot to mark every tree and post, before deciding to head in anyway. I had my annual park pass. I'd camp at one of the designated sites near Johnson Valley Reservoir. Spend a week walking trails and cooking over a fire, and maybe figure out how to feel something other than this hollow ache that had taken up residence in my chest. The gravel road into the forest wound through stands of aspen so thick their white trunks looked like prison bars. It was late September, the leaves turning that impossible gold that looked photoshopped against the blue sky. Apollo barked once at something in the trees, probably a squirrel, and I reached over to scratch behind his ears. "We're good, buddy," I told him. "Just us out here." I found a spot near the reservoir, a flat clearing ringed by aspens with a fire pit someone had made from stacked stones. The nearest campsite was at least a mile away through the trees. Perfect. I backed the RV into position, leveled it, and set up my camp chair facing the water. Apollo immediately bounded off to investigate the perimeter, his golden coat flashing between the white tree trunks. The silence hit me first. Not the peaceful kind. The aggressive kind. The kind that pushes against your eardrums like pressure changes in an airplane. I'd expected bird calls, wind in the leaves, the small sounds of forest life. Instead, there was just nothing. Even the reservoir was still, its surface like black glass. "Apollo," I called, suddenly uneasy. "Come here, boy." He emerged from the trees, moving slower than usual, his ears back. He came to my side and sat pressed against my leg, which wasn't like him at all. Apollo was friendly to the point of stupidity, the kind of dog who'd try to play with a bear, but now he was trembling slightly, his eyes fixed on the forest behind us. I followed his gaze. The aspens stood motionless. Not a single leaf moving, despite the wind I could feel on my face. "Just the woods being weird," I said, more to myself than to Apollo. "It's fine." I spent the afternoon getting settled, trying to ignore the way my voice seemed to die the moment it left my mouth, how sounds didn't echo the way they should. I started a fire as the sun began to set, the flames struggling to catch despite the dry wood. Apollo refused to leave my side, his head on his paws, watching the forest with an intensity that made my skin prickle. That's when I first heard it. A rustling in the trees. Not wind. The leaves weren't moving. It was more like whispers, like dozens of people talking just below the threshold of hearing, their voices blending into a susurrus that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Hello," I called out, feeling stupid even as I did it. The rustling stopped. Apollo whined, a sound I'd never heard him make before, high and desperate. "It's okay," I told him, trying to convince myself as much as him. Probably just wind, or animals. But I knew it wasn't. The trees were still silent. Nothing moved. I pulled Apollo inside the RV as darkness fell, locking the door behind us like that would somehow help. Through the windows I could see the aspens ringing our camp, their white bark glowing faintly in the moonlight. I made dinner, canned chili I barely tasted, and tried to read a book I'd brought, but the words wouldn't stick. My eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the forest beyond. Around 10, Apollo's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I listened. The rustling had started again, but closer now, much closer, and this time I could make out distinct sounds within it, voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once in that same low, urgent whisper. I couldn't make out words exactly, but there was a rhythm to it, like conversation, like gossip. "Who's out there?" I shouted through the window. The rustling stopped instantly. Then, after a moment that stretched too long, a single voice emerged from the silence. Clear, distinct, painfully familiar. "Thomas," it said in Sarah's voice. "Thomas, why did you let me leave?" My blood went cold. Apollo was barking now, full-throated and terrified, his paws scrabbling against the RV door like he wanted to break through it. "That's not real," I said out loud. "That's not fucking real." "You didn't fight for us," Sarah's voice continued, coming from the trees to my right. "You just let me go. Like I didn't matter." "Shut up," I whispered. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." The rustling resumed, all those voices talking at once, and now I could hear fragments of what they were saying. My name, Sarah's name, details from our marriage that no one should know, arguments we'd had behind closed doors, things I'd said in anger, secrets I'd never told anyone. "He called her a burden," one voice whispered. "He thought about leaving first," another added. "He wanted her to suffer," a third chimed in. "Stop it," I screamed. Apollo was howling now, a sound of pure terror. I grabbed him, held him close, felt his heart hammering against my chest. The voices grew louder, overlapping, competing to share my failures, my cruelties, every dark thought I'd ever had. They knew everything. Things I'd forgotten. Things I'd tried to forget. Then, as suddenly as it started, silence. I sat in that silence for hours, Apollo trembling in my arms, neither of us daring to move. The fire outside had died. Through the window the aspens stood motionless, their leaves perfectly still. When dawn finally came, pale and gray, I was still awake. My eyes burned. My throat was raw from breathing too hard. Apollo had finally fallen asleep, exhausted, his head heavy on my lap. I needed to leave. Pack up and drive away and never come back. But in the morning light, with the forest looking almost normal, the fear from the night before seemed distant, dreamlike. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe grief did this to people, made them hear things, see things. Maybe I was losing my mind and the forest had nothing to do with it. I stepped outside to assess the damage from the night. The fire pit was cold. The aspens surrounding the camp looked exactly as they had yesterday. Nothing was disturbed, nothing was wrong, except for the words carved into every tree trunk facing my RV, hundreds of them, covering the white bark in thin, precise letters. My handwriting, Sarah's handwriting, words we'd said to each other, both loving and cruel, scratched into the wood like someone had spent all night transcribing our marriage into the forest itself. "I love you more than I thought I could love anything," read one tree. "You make me feel so alone," said another. "We're going to be happy," promised a third. "I can't do this anymore," concluded a fourth. I stood in the center of the clearing, slowly turning, reading the chronicle of my failed relationship carved into 100 aspen trunks. Apollo sat in the RV doorway, refusing to come out. My hands were shaking. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. I walked to the nearest tree, touched the carved letters with my fingertips. The grooves were fresh, the exposed wood pale and raw. Someone, something, had done this last night while I cowered inside. A rustling started in the trees to my left. I spun toward it, my heart in my throat. The leaves on one aspen were moving. Just that one tree, while all the others remained still. The rustling grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't leaves at all. The tree was whispering. I could see its leaves trembling with the effort. Could hear the voice emerging from the rustling. My mother's voice, from 20 years ago, telling me about the day my father left. A memory I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. He said he never wanted children, the tree whispered in my mother's broken voice. He said you were the reason he was leaving. Another tree started rustling. My college roommate's voice, sharing the rumor I'd started about a girl who'd rejected me. Then another, my first boss, recounting the day I'd stolen credit for a coworker's project. Then another and another, until a dozen trees were whispering at once, all of them sharing my secrets, my failures, every petty cruelty and moment of weakness. "Stop it!" I screamed at them. "What do you want from me?" The whispering intensified, becoming a roar of rustling leaves and overlapping voices. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just around me, it was inside me, vibrating in my bones, in my teeth. Then Apollo barked, sharp and urgent, and I looked back at the RV. A man was standing next to it. He was wearing my clothes, the jacket I'd hung on the camp chair, the boots I'd left outside the door. He was my height, my build, but his face was wrong, like someone had described me to an artist who'd never seen a photograph. The features were approximately right but slightly off, the proportions strange, the expression slack and vacant. He was staring at me with eyes that didn't blink. "Thomas," he said in my voice, but distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "Why did you come here?" I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Apollo was barking frantically, but the thing wearing my face didn't look at him. It only had eyes for me. "This is our place," it said. "We've been talking about you. The trees told us you were coming. They know everything about you now. Every word you've ever said. Every thought you've tried to hide." The whispering grew louder, more frenzied. I could feel it pressing against my skull, trying to get inside. "We want to know more," the thing continued, taking a step toward me. Tell us everything. We're so curious about what made you this way." Its mouth kept moving after it stopped talking, words continuing in that awful, rustling whisper. "Tell us, tell us, tell us, tell us." I ran, straight into the forest, away from the thing wearing my face, away from the RV and Apollo and any kind of sense. Branches whipped at my face. Roots grabbed at my feet. And all around me the aspens were rustling, whispering, sharing everything they'd learned about me, calling out my secrets to each other like gossiping neighbors. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed against a tree trunk and curled into myself, gasping. The whispering stopped. I looked up. I was in a grove of aspens, so thick I couldn't see the sky. Every tree trunk around me was covered in writing, not just words now, but entire paragraphs, pages of text carved into the white bark. My life story, transcribed in excruciating detail. My childhood, my first kiss, the time I cheated on a math test in 8th grade, the night I told Sarah I loved her, the morning she said she couldn't do this anymore. Everything. "We know you now," the trees whispered in unison. "We've shared you with each other. You're part of us. You'll never leave." I pushed myself to my feet, stumbling deeper into the grove. The trees all looked the same. Every direction I turned, more white trunks, more carved words, more of my life exposed and dissected and shared. I was lost. Completely, hopelessly lost. That's when I heard Sarah's voice again, coming from directly in front of me. "Thomas," she said, "I'm here. I've been waiting for you." I looked up and saw her standing between two aspens, wearing the green dress she'd worn on our first date. She looked exactly as I remembered. Dark hair, warm eyes, that slight smile that used to make everything okay. "Sarah," I whispered. "I never left," she said. "I've been here the whole time. The trees told me you were coming. They told me everything you've been thinking. About me, about us." She stepped closer. Something was wrong with the way she moved. Too smooth, too fluid, like she was gliding rather than walking. "They say you still love me," she continued. "Is that true?" "Yes," I said, the word escaping before I could stop it. "Yes, I still love you." "Then stay," she said, reaching out to touch my face. "Stay with me here. The trees want to know more about you, about us. They want to understand love. They've been alone for so long, Thomas. Thousands of years alone, connected by roots but never truly understanding each other. But now they've learned to listen, to share, to whisper all their secrets through the leaves." Her fingers touched my cheek, and they were cold. Bark cold. Wood cold. "You can teach them," she whispered. "Share everything with them. They'll keep it safe. They'll remember it forever. Every moment of joy and pain and fear. You'll never have to carry it alone anymore." I jerked away from her touch, stumbling backward. "You're not Sarah," I said. "She's gone. She left me." The thing wearing Sarah's face tilted its head, that slight smile never wavering. "You're right," it said. "Sarah left, but I'm everything you remember about her. Everything the trees learned from your thoughts, your memories, your grief. Isn't that better? Isn't that what you really want? The version of her you created in your mind, instead of the real person who walked away?" The aspens around us started rustling again, and I could hear them sharing this new information, passing it between themselves like a secret too good to keep. "He still loves her," they whispered. "After everything, he still loves her." "He wishes she'd come back," another tree added. "He dreams about her every night," a third confirmed. "Stop it," I said weakly. "Please stop." But they didn't. They couldn't. The trees had learned to gossip, and now they couldn't help themselves. They shared every observation, every detail, every new piece of information they gleaned from my presence. The rustling grew louder, more excited, 100,000 leaves talking at once. Not Sarah was still watching me with that perfect, patient smile. "The trees have been alone for so long," she said again. "Connected, but isolated. They could feel each other through the roots, but they couldn't communicate, couldn't share their thoughts, until something changed, until they learned that human words had power, that memories could be carved into bark and held forever, that thoughts could be whispered through leaves." She took another step closer. "There was a woman," she continued. "Years ago, she came here to die, sat against one of the trees and told it everything, her whole life, every regret, every moment of joy and sorrow. And when she was gone, the tree remembered. It carved her words into its bark and shared them through its roots with all the others. And they wanted more. They needed more. They learned to call people here, to pull memories from their minds, to write their stories into the wood." My stomach turned. "How many?" "Hundreds," Not Sarah said. "Over the years, all those hikers who got lost. All those campers who wandered away from their sites and never came back. The trees took their stories, added them to the collection, and with each new person they got better at listening, at understanding, at whispering." The rustling intensified, ecstatic, proud. "You could be part of something beautiful," Not Sarah whispered. "Something eternal. Your story carved into the grove, shared between the trees forever. You'd never be alone again. Neither would they." "I want to leave," I said. "I want to go home." "But you don't have a home," she said softly. "Sarah took that from you when she left. You said so yourself. You came here because you had nowhere else to go." She was right. The apartment in Denver was just a place, not a home. The life I'd built with Sarah was gone. I had nothing left except Apollo and... Apollo! Christ, I'd left him at the RV, alone with that thing wearing my face. "I need to get back," I said, panic rising in my chest. "My dog!" "He's fine," Not Sarah assured me. "The trees like him. He doesn't have secrets to share. He doesn't lie or hide or hurt people. He's simple, pure. They don't understand him, but they like him. I didn't care. I needed to get back to him. I needed to leave this place before the trees carved any deeper into my mind." I ran again, choosing a direction at random. The aspens blurred past me, their white trunks like prison bars, their leaves rustling with excited whispers. I could hear them sharing observations about my flight, analyzing my fear, speculating about where I'd go. "He's scared," they whispered. "He's running east," another noted. "No, northeast," a third corrected. "He'll come back," a fourth promised. They always come back. I burst out of the grove into a clearing and stopped dead. The RV was directly in front of me. Impossible. I'd run for at least 10 minutes in a straight line. I should be miles from camp, but there it was. My Winnebago. The fire pit, the reservoir beyond. And Apollo, thank God, still sitting in the doorway, watching me with frightened eyes. The thing wearing my face was gone. I staggered toward the RV, my legs shaking. Apollo barked once, sharp, and I looked where he was staring. The aspens around the clearing had moved. The circle had tightened, their trunks now just a few feet from the RV, forming a barrier between us and any escape route. And every single trunk was covered in fresh carvings. Not just words now, but images. Pictures of me and Sarah. Our wedding. The apartment. The arguments. The silence. The ending. Our whole relationship illustrated on 100 trees, like a gallery exhibition of my failure. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The rustling started again, softer now, almost gentle. "Stay," the trees whispered. "Share more with us. We want to understand. We want to know what love feels like, what it tastes like, how it dies." I lunged for the RV, grabbed Apollo, and practically threw him inside. My keys were on the counter where I'd left them. I snatched them up, jumped into the driver's seat, and turned the ignition. The engine coughed, but didn't start. "Come on," I pleaded, turning the key again. "Come on, please." Another cough. Nothing. The rustling grew louder, more insistent. I could feel the trees pressing in, could smell the sap and bark and earth. Through the windshield, I watched as more words appeared on the trunks, carving themselves into the bark right before my eyes. "He's trying to leave," they wrote. "He's afraid," they observed. "He'll stay," they concluded. "He has to stay. We're not finished with him yet." I turned the key again, pumping the gas pedal. The engine turned over once, twice, and roared to life. I didn't wait. I threw the RV into drive and punched the accelerator, aiming for the gap between two aspens. The tires spun in the dirt, found purchase, and we lurched forward. Branches scraped against the sides of the RV with a sound like fingernails on metal. Apollo was barking, terrified as I steered between the trees. Something grabbed the bumper, a root or branch, I couldn't tell, and the RV jerked to a stop. The engine whined in protest. I floored the accelerator, and whatever held us snapped with a crack like breaking bone. We burst out of the circle of aspens and onto the gravel road. I didn't slow down, didn't look back, just drove as fast as the RV would go down that winding forest road. The aspens flew past on either side, their leaves rustling so loudly I could hear it over the engine, over Apollo's barking, over my own ragged breathing. The ranger station was still closed when I reached the forest entrance. I didn't stop. I drove straight through onto the highway, putting miles between myself and Fish Lake National Forest. I drove for 3 hours before I felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station outside Salina. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the pump. Apollo jumped out to pee, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were small pieces of bark stuck in his fur. White bark, aspen bark. I pulled them out one by one, my stomach churning. Each piece had words carved into it. My words. Things I'd said to Sarah. Things I'd thought but never spoken. The last piece I found was lodged behind Apollo's collar. I held it up to the light. It read, "The trees remember. The trees share. The trees are never alone. Neither will you be." I threw it on the ground and crushed it under my heel. We didn't go back to Denver. I drove south to Albuquerque, then west to California, like distance would somehow help. I sold the RV in Los Angeles and bought a small apartment in Santa Monica, close to the ocean, far from any forests. Apollo adjusted better than I did. He still follows me everywhere, but he started wagging his tail again, started playing with other dogs at the park. He's forgetting, the way animals do. I can't forget. Sometimes, late at night, I hear rustling in the walls. I know it's just the building settling, just pipes and electrical wiring and the normal sounds of a structure breathing. But it sounds like whispering, like leaves, like gossip being shared between connected things that should be separate. I never finished signing those divorce papers. Sarah called once to ask why. I told her I wasn't ready. She said she understood, that she'd give me more time. We talked for 20 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in a year. It felt almost normal, almost okay. But the whole time we were talking, I could hear rustling in the background of her call, leaves moving in wind. And when she said goodbye, just before she hung up, I heard it clearly. A whisper, multiple whispers, all talking at once in that familiar, hungry way. She's connected to him, they said, through memory, through love, through pain. We can reach her too. We can share her too. I tried calling her back. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I've called 17 times in the past 3 days. No answer. 2 nights ago, Apollo started growling at something outside the window. When I looked out, I saw a woman standing on the beach staring up at my apartment. She was too far away to make out clearly, but she wore a green dress. And she stood perfectly still, even when the wind picked up, even when waves crashed behind her. She didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared. I closed the blinds and haven't opened them since. This morning, I found words carved into my wooden coffee table. Thin, precise letters in handwriting that's almost mine, but not quite. The trees shared you with the ocean, it read. The ocean shared you with the beach. The beach shared you with the sand. The sand shared you with the building. The building shared you with us. We're learning, it continued. We're connecting. We're whispering to each other across distances you can't imagine. And we all want to know the same thing. What is it like to be human? What is it like to hurt? What is it like to love and lose and keep on living? Tell us, the final line demanded. Tell us everything. I can hear them now, in the walls, in the floors, in the very structure of this building, whispering, sharing, gossiping about the man in apartment 304 who came back from the forest with secrets carved into his soul. And I know, with a certainty that makes me want to tear my skin off, that I will never be alone again. Something learned my voice in those woods. Something copied my memories, my fears, my face, and it's teaching others how to do the same, spreading like roots underground, connecting everything to everything until the whole world is whispering. Apollo is sleeping next to me as I write this. Tomorrow, I'll take him to my mother's house in Phoenix and tell her to keep him safe, keep him away from forests and beaches and anywhere things might be watching. Then I'll come back here and wait, because they're right about one thing. I don't have a home anymore. I don't have Sarah. I don't have anything except the story they want me to tell. And maybe, if I tell it well enough, they'll let me sleep. Maybe they'll stop whispering. Maybe they'll finally understand what it means to be human, and they'll leave me alone. But I don't think they will. I don't think they ever will. The trees are gossiping about me right now. I can hear them through the walls, sharing everything they learned, everything they took, everything they'll never give back. And I'm so tired of carrying it all alone.